Now this form of simple writing works just fine if we know exactly how many values we want to write to our file and exactly the order we want to write them in. As we'll see later, when we load from this file, we're just going to always assume that the first number we encounter is myInt1, the second one is myInt2, and the third one is myInt3. Most of the interesting applications we'll write, though, don't have such a predictable number of variables. What if we want to write a list of items to a file? Let's pretend we're writing a list of names, for example. How would we do that? The most obvious way would be to iterate over the list, writing them to the file one by one. So here on line 1, we create a list of names. On line 5, we open our file, and as before, we set it equal to a variable called output file. We're still in write mode, so we're still going to overwrite whatever is currently in the file. And then we're going to start a loop. We'll loop over each name in the list of names. And for each of them, all we're going to do is call output file dot write, followed by the name that we want to write. Name is going to take each name from the list one by one, and so every time this body code runs, it's going to just print the next name to our output file. When the loop is done running, we'll close the file, and we can then open our output file and see that the names were correctly printed. And what's more, they're printed in the same order that they were in that list. Now Python also has a handy way of writing multiple lines to a file directly. Python has a writeLines method that takes as input a list of strings and automatically writes them to the file. So instead of looping over them manually, we can instead just call one method and write them all at once. But of course, you can immediately see the problem here. They're all crammed together on one line. WriteLines doesn't append new line characters to the end of each item in the list. I have no idea why. But there's another way we can get around this. Remember when we were talking about strings, we covered a join method? Well, this is a great application of the join method. We can call the escape sequence that represents a new line dot join my list. And what that's going to do is create one new string where between each individual pair of values from our list, there exists a line break character. The result of calling join right here is just one long string containing all of our values, each separated by these line breaks. And so we can just call our regular write method on that string that results from calling join. In practice, this is what I do most often. What's notable is that we can also alternate back and forth between writing variables and writing lists. So here we've basically merged our previous two programs together. We create 3 individual variables and then a list containing 8 values. As before, we then open our file and set the open file equal to output file, and then we get started. On lines 11, 13, and 15, we write each individual variable, or the value thereof, to the file, separated by these new line characters. So we get 12, 23, and 34, like we did before. And then we call the same line to write the list to the file that we called previously as well. That takes my list, joins it together into one string with new line characters separating each item in the list, and writes that whole list to the file as well. And then we close the file so we can access it outside of this program. So the major takeaways are using the open function to open a file given its file name, and assign the open file equal to a variable, and using that variable.write to write individual lines to that file.